In Iowa, we are so trusting of our neighbors, and sometimes that's really good. For the most part, it is. But for Sheila Collins, it didn't end up being as helpful for her to get home when she asked a stranger for help. This week on Investigating Iowa, we're talking about the case of Sheila Collins from Iowa State University. Hello and welcome to Investigating Iowa. My name is Sarah. I'm so excited you came back this week because we just wrapped up our mystery week here, and it was kind of a long week to get everything done, but we are back again today. If you missed already, we had a case already this morning come out, and because I didn't get a case out on Friday, I decided to double up today. And so I just want to say thank you for everybody's support as I did this week's cases. Today's case is actually a murder investigation that we are going to talk about. And so I just wanted to kind of give a heads up and a warning to those watching. And it's up to your discretion if you want to watch after this point, or I will also have timestamps where you can skip ahead if you don't want to hear the details of necessarily what they witnessed at the scene of the crime, and you can just kind of hear the whole other storyline going on. So I will have those time stamps in the video for those watching who just don't want to hear all the details about what happened to Sheila. Again, as always, I'm just going to give my disclaimer that I mean no disrespect to the family or the people I am talking about. I'm just gathering this information through online resources, especially Iowa Cold Cases, who helped put together this case. And I'm going to deliver it in this video just to inform more people about Sheila's case. I actually first heard this story when I was living in the same dormitory as Sheila was. I was going to Iowa State University, and some of my dorm mates and I one weekend were kind of telling ghost stories of Iowa State, and they were all very, very fictional. It was stuff that we knew weren't true. People had debunked it and stuff, but they were mostly ghost stories. And one girl says, well, you know, a girl in our dorm has passed away in the 70s or so. And we all kind of sat around and we're like, what? And we had never heard it before. And so she tells us the story, and we didn't believe her, and we didn't know the name of the young woman who it was. And so we were trying to look up online who it could have been, and we couldn't find any information. So we all just kind of thought maybe this was a false story too, or like kind of a folklore of Iowa State. And then when I was researching these cases to have on this series, I realized this one sounds exactly like the one I heard when I was a freshman in college. And sure enough, it was. And what hurts me so much is that it hits so close to home. And I think that I lived in the same dorm as her. I was in the same court, in the Richardson court area as her, and there's just so many similarities. I know when we go through this story exactly where she was, exactly what it looked like when she was doing these things, because I've been in those spaces. So that's just kind of my mood going into this case. This is kind of hard for me to share just because it feels like it's really, really close to home. So with that, I'll get into her case. In 1949, Sheila was born to John and Muriel Collins outside of the Chicago city area. She was kind of living in a suburb, and she was known to be extremely studious and kind of quiet, but she decided she wanted to go to Iowa State University for English. When the fall came for her to move into her dormitory, she was actually leaving her boyfriend, her long-term boyfriend, and he was going to a school in Illinois. And they kept in touch, very much so, but this was also in the 1970s. And so they would have dorm phones, and they would kind of share phone calls and tell each other who called when, and that will kind of play in later. For those who don't know the Iowa State University campus, there is the Memorial Union, which is kind of the hub that everybody hangs out at. It has, nowadays, it has multiple food courts, and there's a lot of offices in there. There's the Great Hall where they do a bunch of banquets and concerts, and it's just been a really pivotal point of the Iowa State community to have that building. And I know every college campus kind of has their own Memorial Union. The Memorial Union had a giant board that says "Going My Way," and you put up a little card up there saying your name and what phone number they can contact you at, and where you're trying to go and when you're trying to go there. And so Sheila actually filled this out because she wanted to go home for the weekend, but her boyfriend couldn't come and pick her up. He had a car and he couldn't come and pick her up that weekend, so she decided to use this board to try and get back to the Chicago area. Pretty much it was glorified hitchhiking. People would come along and check the board, see who was going in the same direction, and would contact them and say, hey, I have an extra seat in my car. You can drive with me, or I can drop you off at this area, or I'm going in this direction. On January 26, 1968, Sheila actually gets a phone call to the Elm dorm phone, and one of her friends answers it and says it's for Sheila. Sheila comes to the phone and has a brief conversation with somebody, and she comes back to her dorm after calling her parents and telling them that she got a ride home. And I believe she called her boyfriend as well, just saying like, hey, I'm gonna make it home, no worries. And so her parents and her boyfriend knew. She walks past one of her friends' room, and her friend says, you know, who was on the phone? And she says, oh, it was some man. I can't remember his name, but some man called. He got my card from the Going My Way board, and she said he can take me, but I have to be ready in like 10-15 minutes. So they go to her dorm and start throwing clothes into her suitcase. They're rushing to get her ready to leave, and she asked, you know, where are you meeting him? She said, we're meeting on the corner of Lincoln Way and Beach Avenue. So her friend bids her goodbye, and she leaves. And then the last time she's seen is on the corner of Lincoln Way and Beach Avenue. Just for those who don't know, Beach and Lincoln Way are a cross-section to get into Richardson Court, which has a bunch of dormitories in it. But Lincoln Way is a huge street in Ames. It's very, very busy and populated, and at any time of the day. And so that's probably where a lot of people saw her, but they know for sure that that was the last time she was witnessed. But nobody saw her getting into a car or anything. So the next day on Saturday, Muriel and James actually realized that she wasn't home yet. You know, they thought she was going to get home really late at night the night before, but she didn't end up coming home. So at about noon on Saturday, her parents called the police and reported her missing. So this is the point in the case where I'm going to put up a timestamp, because we are going to get to the point where they find Sheila's body outside of Nevada. And so I'll put up a timestamp on the screen somewhere, and so you can skip ahead if you don't want to hear kind of the details of what they found, and you can just come back in when we're talking about where the police were searching. It's now Sunday, and nobody has seen Sheila in 2 days, and a father and son are actually driving around the Colo area doing some fox hunting. And Colo is a little bit outside of the Ames and Nevada area. Nevada is about 15 minutes away from Ames, so it's not too far. They're driving down a gravel road, and the son points out a foot that he sees in a shallow ditch. The son and father drive to the nearest town and try and call the police and get them over there to investigate. Sure enough, they find Sheila Collins in the ditch. She was found resting on her knees with her head put forward into kind of the ground area, and her woolen coat was put over her head and her face and her shoulders, kind of like somebody had covered her up partially. Her sweatshirt was up around her neck as if it was almost partially taken off, and the rest of her clothes were found nearby. She also had all of her belongings that were in her suitcase, and kind of all of her extra stuff that she was carrying with her were placed on the other side of a fence in kind of a farmland. They thought this was peculiar because the person didn't try and just throw these things over the fence. They just set them on the other side of this fence about 6 feet away from her body. She had actually been strangled with a nylon cord, which was found at the scene, and a metal pipe that was attached to the cord, which the person must have used to tighten the cord. They also checked to see if she had been sexually abused or assaulted during this instance, and they said that there was no evidence to show that she had been. So police kind of assumed that this person had intentions of sexually hurting her, but they either couldn't get themselves aroused enough, or something must have interrupted him when he was trying to. So a lot of you might be hopping back into the case now, and they have found her body outside of Nevada, Colo, Ames area. It's kind of on a gravel road in the middle of nowhere. But this is where the case kind of gets messy, because they weren't sure whose police jurisdiction it was. So there were Colo police involved, there were Nevada police involved, there were Ames police involved, there were Chicago police involved because they had reported a missing person. The one person trying to unify this all seemed to be the Story County attorney. He was the one who asked the FBI to come in and try and help them investigate. But the FBI, for some reason, said that they had no jurisdiction in this case either. And in all the reports I found, I couldn't find an explanation of why they felt like they weren't able to investigate this case either. But that left it on the locals' hands. So that left it with, again, the Nevada police, the Colo police, the Ames police, the Chicago police. A bunch of people were coming forward at this point with trying to give tips and help to police in different areas. And there were two clairvoyants who came forward. And a lot of people question, the power of clairvoyance and, whether or not they can actually see what they're seeing, if they should step into cases and say anything. But these two came forward on separate occasions, and they said that they knew things about her case. And the reports didn't explain what they knew, but they said that it was actually very credible that they knew things that weren't publicly displayed in this case. And they actually knew quite a few things that were similar to what other people were coming into tips with. While I was researching this case, I did come across a couple of message boards who were talking about how this sounded very familiar to a case that was happening in Michigan at the time. And it was a super notorious serial killer in Michigan who had actually killed about 7, maybe possibly more, girls and boys who were done the same way that Sheila's murder happened. And so they wondered, since this person was active during the same time as Sheila's killing, that they wondered if he might have been driving through Ames at that point and maybe picked up Sheila, and people just haven't made the connection. But again, that's just kind of a stretch. I just wanted to put that out there. And his name was John Norman Collins, which was no relation to Sheila at all. But it was an interesting conversation that these women were having, because they were talking about, well, could he have been driving through at that point and had maybe she would have been one of the earlier cases of his, and maybe he was heading to the Michigan area and that would be in his direction because she was going to Chicago. So who knows? I just wanted to throw that in there as a fact. So the Iowa State Daily actually came up with a reward for anybody who had information about Sheila's case. And I am also touched by this because I worked at the Iowa State Daily, and I can't imagine covering a case like this as a journalist at that time. But the reward was for about $410 in the 70s, which is about the same equivalent as $2,000 today. The search for the perpetrator would actually go to other states. They thought this person could literally be anywhere. At one point, the Story County attorney said that right now, anybody could be a suspect, which was his direct words. They had interviewed people in California. The California police were helping them. There were people over on the other side of the country who were helping them. It literally was a group effort of people trying to find this person that could be anywhere in the United States. So in 1999, the Iowa State Daily did an update article about this case, and they interviewed the Ames chief of police in 1999 about maybe what happened during this case, his knowledge of what was going on. And he talked very, very candidly about it. He said that there was about 3 or 4 investigations going on at once, and these people were withholding information from other police departments because it was more of like a pride thing. Like, they wanted to be the police department to solve this case, and they're going to try their hardest to do it, but they don't want anybody else's help because they didn't want to share the credit for it if they figured it out. So these police departments were selfishly like withholding information from each other that could have been pivotal at that point. I will have the Story County Sheriff's Office phone number on the screen now. If you have any information, please come forward. I have so many questions about this case, a couple including the fact that nobody saw the car that she got into, and I find that hard to believe just because it's such a busy area. I can't imagine that people might not notice what vehicle she was getting into, but again, it's a Friday night at like 8:30. Like, it's a busy area. People thought maybe she was just getting in the car with her friend, and I don't know. But another question being, if the police departments were being as selfish as this police chief says they were in withholding information, have they shared that information now? Have they shared their police files, their case files with each other now that it's been a few years? It's obviously maybe some new employment, and maybe people can share information and make some connections now. And the last one being, if they had ever made this correlation between the Michigan murders and Sheila's case. And I wonder if they had ever actually had contact with the Michigan police on maybe that this was one of his victims. But I just think that's all some very interesting conversation you could maybe have in the comments section. Kind of interested to hear your all of your thoughts, but please be respectful as you comment on Sheila's case. It is somebody's sister, daughter, ex-girlfriend, friend, all those types of things. So I will look forward to seeing you guys next time on Investigating Iowa.